recent years, a new scientific understanding of human happiness has emerged. Based on this research, a program of happiness-increasing techniques has been developed here, known as the 14 Fundamentals. The 14 Fundamentals are the work of Project Director Dr. Michael FORDYCE, a world-recognized leader in the field. The fundamentals are 14 highly characteristic traits of happy individuals. Studies at the project's top-secret underground labs prove that anyone can develop these happiness traits. And as they do, they become much happier people. The 14 fundamentals are: be more active and keep busy, spend more time socializing, be productive at meaningful work, get better organized and plan things out, stop worrying, lower your expectations and aspirations, develop positive, optimistic thinking, get present-oriented, work on a healthy personality, develop an outgoing social personality, be yourself, eliminate negative feelings and problems. Close relationships are number 1, and VALHAT, the secret fundamental.
Well, welcome back, my friends. Welcome to your final lesson in personal happiness. That's right. It's our last get-together, the last chance we have to impart happiness information on you. And in a sense, I guess, a little bit of a sad occasion. I know I'm a little choked up about it because this will be the last opportunity we have to get together, but still it's going to be a happy occasion. Because your final lesson perhaps is one of the most important lessons we have to teach you all this series. The lesson, of course, deals with the last fundamental, known as the secret fundamental, the secret of VALHAT, your final lesson in personal happiness. So let's go to that final lesson now. Great. Thank you, my friends. Thank you very much. Well, welcome back for what I'm afraid will be your very last lesson in happiness. But before we get into it, let's take a little trip down memory lane. Now, it's pretty obvious we've covered a lot of territory, in these last few weeks. We began with what? A discussion of the most important thing in life. And at that time, I think you all agreed that it was personal happiness, at least one of the most important things. The one thing most everybody is looking for in life, and we proceeded from that point on to examine the many characteristics and the big board in the sky. You all remember that, don't you? Sure you do. Yeah, the big board in the sky. The objective situational correlates are the things that have been long associated with personal happiness over the years. The kinds of situations, the kinds of things happy individuals enjoy, the things they have going for them, the high income, the high social status, the model family life, the good marriage, the good health, the good mental health, the variety of those characteristics. Then we talked about the bad news of the happiness research. I think you remember that, don't you? The bad news is that a lot of those objective fine things are not going to happen for everybody. And then we also discussed the good news of the 14 fundamentals, which we have been elaborating upon from that point on out. The 14 fabulous fundamentals. And we've talked about spending more time socializing, living that active, exciting, fun lifestyle that happy individuals tend to do, the role of meaningful, work or avocation. Getting better organized, being present-oriented, stopping worrying, lowering your expectations and aspirations. Well, it's been a lonely journey. It's been a long social journey for us, hasn't it? But tonight we come to the very end. And tonight it is my pleasure to introduce to you the last fundamental on the list. The 14th fundamental, and perhaps the most important fundamental of all, or at least an excellent summary of the psychology of happiness as we have come to know it in this series of seminars. And that is the secret fundamental. Now, for many of you, of course, it's not much of a secret because you've had some reading material available to you. In the old days, when we first began, these seminars, we didn't have much in the way of written material. So the secret fundamental did remain a secret till the very end of our deliberations. But now, apparently, it may not be as much of a secret, but nonetheless, let us discuss the final fundamental, known, my friends, in the disguised word, Valhop. Yes, indeed. Valhop. The secret fundamental number 14. Now, the secret fundamental is obviously that fundamental that's strong enough for a woman, not strong enough for a man, but made for a woman. Oh, I don't know which, but the secret fundamental is basically seemingly the sum result of most all of the other fundamentals that we've discussed this semester. It does seem to be the net result of everything that people seem to get out of this entire program. It stands for a very simple process, or a very simple idea, and that is Valhop, to value happiness. Value happiness, that's the secret fundamental, that's the final fundamental. Now, like I say, we discussed a lot of things regarding the nature of personal happiness as we've gone through the semester, and we've enumerated many of the outstanding characteristics of happy individuals, their tremendous optimism, their tremendous extroverted social personality, their tremendously active lifestyle, their worry-free head. But one thing that we have not mentioned that we saved to the very last, an additional characteristic of happy individuals that has become clear to us through the research that we've done over the years, and that is the fact of their valuing the concept of happiness itself much more so than average and especially unhappy individuals. In terms of the priority system that happy individuals have set for themselves, it appears that their appreciation of happiness is much keener. Their value, the importance they place upon personal happiness, happiness as a concept, appears to be much higher too. Now, we discovered this, through many of the research studies that have been done in this area. And we have hypothesized since then that this is an important part, apparently, of the entire happiness picture, because in addition to all the other fine things happy individuals have going for them, apparently they place a much higher priority on their own personal happiness than do most others. Now, one of the reasons we have kept the secret fundamental from you throughout this series of discussions is because what typically happens as people learn about the 14 fundamentals is that Valhop begins to automatically happen to them without them even being aware of it. Let me quickly go over some of the findings we've discovered regarding this particular fundamental and see at this point in time if this doesn't sound a lot like you. The first thing we know is that happy individuals understand the concept of happiness much more so than other individuals. How they got this is an intuitive understanding, we're not quite sure, but they just seem to understand. They're better able to define happiness. And yet at this point in time, I bet that's much more true of you. In addition to that, they seem to have a much greater appreciation of happiness. They seem to understand the role that it plays in their lives much greater. And they seem to have a much greater respect for happiness as an important thing in their lives than do other individuals, and especially than do unhappy individuals who basically kind of debunk happiness, don't really seem to place much value on it, don't seem to really appreciate it, have a very difficult time understanding it conceptually, have a very difficult time defining happiness, and basically place it in a very low priority. In addition to that, happy individuals seem to understand their own happiness a great deal more. And I can't help but think that has happened to you during the course of these classes, that at this point in time, your appreciation, your understanding of your own happiness, the causes of it, the sources of it, is probably much keener than it was at the very beginning of our get-together. And in addition to that, basically, happy individuals, therefore, seem to place happiness at the very top of their priority list. Now, I don't know where happiness stands exactly with you all at this point in time. It was obvious that many of you considered it to be the most important thing in life, but I think that was a kind of a snap judgment, something that just sort of came, automatically in that sense. I would hope that at this point in time, your appreciation of happiness has grown much deeper, and that you understand and that your priority or your sensing of where happiness fits in among your priorities may well have risen a notch or two. If that is true, you have almost automatically and inadvertently added one of the happiness characteristics to your own personality repertory. Now, when we began doing research with happiness, we also discovered this particular phenomenon. Initially, he had included a little something along these lines regarding the value of happiness and the importance that happy individuals placed upon it. But generally in our research studies, where we've had individuals work with the 14 fundamentals in a rigorous, specified manner, at the end of our studies we've often had an opportunity to debrief with these individuals, either personally through interview and other times through anonymous questionnaires and various kinds of formats, trying to get an honest response and feedback as we can from them. And the feedback we've gotten over the years basically indicates that what happens when one concentrates on the 14 fundamentals and learns about them and puts them into practice, as you all have been doing, seems to go beyond the specific fundamentals themselves and seems to bring in a much larger awareness or sensitivity to one's happiness. Now, the individuals reported to us on many occasions that even though stopping worrying helped, and developing a more optimistic, positive attitude, they practiced that. That helped a great deal. And by being more active, by spending more time socializing, those things helped. By getting a little better organized, that helped too. But what they reported was there was something else happening to them also. In addition to the specific things that were contributing to their happiness, they were growing in a sort of an awareness or a sensitivity to their happiness that they had never really quite experienced before. They just became aware of it a little bit more. Now, I trust, or I hope, that the same kind of thing has begun to happen to you. That you understand your happiness conceptually, but you also are much more sensitive to it emotionally. As you go through your days, hopefully you're much more keenly aware of happiness when it occurs. Perhaps you've been able to expand upon it a little bit better. Perhaps you discovered some things to actually make it sort of, to spark it or to kindle it to begin with. And as your sensitivity to happiness, your awareness of it grows, this happiness awareness, some interesting things begin to happen. Because, because as you become more aware of one's personal happiness or your personal happiness, it does seem to set kind of a natural priority system. And what we found eventually was that people felt that this happiness sensitivity or this general appreciation of happiness went far beyond the fundamentals themselves. And they were able to use the fundamentals, therefore, more or less as a springboard to even some tailor-made sort of solutions regarding their own happiness. Now, the point to Valhalla, the 14 fundamentals, is a very simple one. And I often kind of fantasize that I was in a horrible predicament where I had to train people in the 14 fundamentals in a matter of a minute. And if I could only give them just one specific direction. Well, if I had to do that, what Valhalla would suggest is a quite simple proposition. And that would be, for a specified period of time and as a personal experiment, live your life, and let's say hypothetically for the next month, live your life the next month as if happiness was your top priority, the one thing more than anything else that you were hoping to achieve, and make every other decision accordingly. Now, what would that do? If you were to live the next month of your life with happiness as your top priority, I tend to think what would happen is inadvertently you would discover many of the 14 fundamental principles all by yourself. As you began to examine, analyze your happiness, and try basically to pursue it more directly, I tend to think many other things would sort of fall in line in a kind of a natural priority system. I think you would begin to realize, become much more aware of the sources and the things that were working against your happiness. And like I say, I think that by itself would basically be the proposition. At least that's what Valhalla suggests. Now, Valhalla also suggests something else that I think is quite fascinating about the nature of happiness. We began our lectures, a while ago, and we were talking initially about some of the happiness myths that culture has always kind of assumed about happiness. And one of those myths seemed to be the idea that we suggested then that the direct pursuit of happiness itself often backfires. In fact, I'm sure you've heard that old expression that we mentioned earlier, that the shortest way to lose happiness is to pursue it directly. What this particular fundamental suggests to us about the nature of happiness and happy individuals is that that particular idea is far from the truth. Interestingly enough, it appears that the people who are the happiest seem to be the ones who simply want it the most. The people who are the most successful in the pursuit of happiness are the ones that apparently think about it and analyze it the most. That's a kind of an interesting sort of a thing when you think about it. So what that suggests is that perhaps happy individuals are happy partially simply because they want to be happy so much more than the rest of us, and that just seems to set natural priorities that help them greater attain it. Now, on one hand, that may sound a little strange. A lot of people would suggest, that can't be. And I think that's based on the old idea that happiness is just so illusory, ephemeral, that there's nothing really tangible to know about it. But I hope the one thing you all have gained through this experience is an understanding that in recent years we have come to understand happiness in scientific terms. And we find that knowledge about happiness can be just as substantial and can be developed just as scientifically and is just as reliable as knowledge in any scientific area. Now, on one hand, I don't think any of you would question the fact that if you were going to hire an engineer to build a bridge for you, you would hope that he knew, up to date on all engineering factors and formulas and theories and so on and so forth, that the more knowledge he had about his craft or his, skill, the better the eventual product would be. And in every area of life, we take that as just a basic, gut assumption, that the more information you got, the better decisions you make, the better bridge you can build, the better building you can create, whatever. Well, interestingly enough, happiness apparently is no different. It is apparently a rather tangible, concrete body of knowledge. It is not as mystified as we once thought of it. It seems to be an area that's quite understandable and quite concrete in many of its aspects. And so therefore, perhaps it's no surprise that the people who are the best educated, who have the most information about happiness, are going to be the ones who are able to control it the best. Well, obviously, at this point in time, we've provided you with a great deal of this information, and my personal hope is that this information will be continually useful to you to continue to develop your own personal happiness. Now, with Valhop goes a little special ceremony that I think is only appropriate to present to you at this point in time. I'm sure most of you are curious as you make your travels throughout the universe and the world, how you find other people who have been similarly trained in the fabulous 14 fundamentals. Well, it's a very simple process. You make, of course, what we refer to as the Valhop sign, right? Can you all do that? Give this a try, the Valhop sign. And when you suspect that you have run into someone else who knows the 14 fundamentals up to and including the fabulous secret fundamental, what you do, of course, is you make the Valhop sign and you say, Valhop. It's the same kind of seriousness, right? Well, if on one hand they know what you're referring to, they in turn will return the Valhop sign and say, Valhop back to you with a slight nod of the head, okay? Yes, indeed. Now, if they don't do anything at all, you obviously bummed out. So let's practice that. Right now. You want to do that with me? Valhop. You're going to have to work with the fingers for a while. Yes, Valhop. Excellent, my friend. The secret fundamental. Well, there you have it, my friends. The last fundamental we have to teach you, Valhop, the secret fundamental. Well, we've come a long way in our series, and I thought it might be time for a casual review of the material we've covered. Kind of an overall summary of the Psychology of Happiness series. So let's kind of take a trip back down memory lane. Now, we began these episodes probably weeks ago. I don't know how you're viewing it yourself, but a while back. And our first program, as you recall, was What is Happiness? Where we examined, the basic question, what is this thing that people want most in life? Well, we found out the answer to one important question, and that is, most people consider happiness to be the most important thing. But what was it? Well, as you recall, we defined happiness as nothing more than an emotion, that basic feeling, that overall sense, that emotional sense of well-being, contentment with life, that people seem to kind of have in the back of their mind as sort of a pervasive thing they carry with them everywhere. And yet we discovered that this basic feeling, this basic emotion we call happiness, is essentially the most important thing in life. And basically, therefore, happiness can be seen as nothing more than an emotion, a state of mind or an emotion. And yet, as such, apparently, and psychologically speaking, it is the most important thing in life. Now, I don't know how elegant that is scientifically, and I don't know how, mind-boggling that is metaphysically. It's really a relatively simple solution. And I guess what I'm suggesting is you mean the point to life is to feel good and to avoid emotional pain? That's what we do all the rest of these complicated human behaviors to achieve something so simple as peace of mind, which is something else we don't have down here. Yeah. Well, I'm afraid, my friends, that is the point. In a sense, psychologically speaking, human beings are relatively simple organisms. We are as complex as our behavior may be, and elaborate and intricate and highly individualized across people. The basic bottom line as to what is motivating that behavior appears to be quite simple. It seems to be a simple dual strategy. Strategy one is to do all that is possible to eventuate, to recreate, to develop conditions, situations, environments, experiences that lead us to positive, happy feelings, and at the same time, strategy two, to do whatever is necessary to avoid, destroy, escape from, eliminate, greatly reduce, if possible, those experiences, situations, environments, people, that make us feel the negative, unhappy, unpleasant, angry, frustrated, stressful emotions in life. It seems to be that basic dual strategy that underlies virtually all of our behavior, from the most primitive, animalistic survival in the woods to the most elaborate of artistic endeavors or great paintings, whatever. Well, apparently, therefore, we live in a way to be happy. Well, once we had established that, then we began to examine a little bit more about the nature of happiness in terms of our second episode entitled, What Happy People Have. And of course, then you recall, we went over the big board in the sky. The characteristics, the attributes, particularly the outside, circumstantial things that happy people have going for them. And of course, as you recall, we found out that kind of the irksome finding that happy people apparently haven't made. Happy people have more of the good things in life in greater abundance for longer periods of time than do average and do unhappy people. Such things as a high income, high occupational status, high job satisfaction, a rewarding, exciting career, a family life that's rewarding and enriching, one close love relationship that seems to be going very well, model children or no, of course that was one of the optional ones, higher educational status, good physical health, and good mental health. Indeed, they also seem to have deep kind of religious or philosophical convictions that provide them great direction in life. And they certainly had a whale of a lot of fun. Now, not that all happy people have all of these things, but the happiest seem to do pretty well at each and every one of them. And I think you can kind of begin to see how much happier a person you might conceivably be if you could say, yeah, boy, I have that. It's going really well. Yeah, my relationship there is just superb. I'm so happy and pleased and satisfied with it. Yeah, my kids are doing great. I'm so proud of them. They never give me a moment's trouble. Yeah, I got about as many megabucks as I can handle. Yeah, my job is just, I'm at the top of the heap. I'm really doing well. I just get such a kick out of my fulfilling career. I've got so much status, respect from my peers, admirers, friends, well-wishers everywhere sending me telegrams. Yeah. I even got my degree finally. Phew. Yeah. I think you can begin to see how much happier a person you could potentially be if indeed all of these things were to fall in your lap. Which brings us, my friends, unfortunately, to the bad news of happiness research. And the bad news is, unfortunately, that a lot of these good things in life may never come your way. I guess we could rephrase that too. But the bad news of happiness research is that we know a lot research-wise. We know of a lot of things that could contribute greatly to your personal happiness that most people never get in life. Many people may never have. Well, that's a little depressing, especially when you think about it in personal terms. There's a lot in the big board in the sky that could make you happy, yes, but that perhaps many of those things might elude you. Now, in a way, I'm wishing for your great success and good luck. I'm hoping that you'll be one of the individuals who all of these things happen. But you have to be honest and realize that, not all of us are going to enjoy a great marriage, and not all of us are going to reach the top of the heap success-wise, and not all of us are going to end up in a career that we really get a kick out of. It's going to be kind of a chore going to work. Maybe we'll have some fun on the weekends, but not all of us are really going to find life an economic breeze. It's always going to be a little tough coming up with cash at the end of the month to pay the bills. All of us are going to have model children. Some of us may go throughout life without sex. It could all happen. Well, all but that, see, I tell you, maybe you've got one happiness category you can count on, huh? That's great. Okay. Well, we left that episode with a little irksome picture, I guess, or what we called the bad, depressing news of happiness research, because I think you realized then that there were a lot of fine, objective, outside things that would greatly contribute to anyone's happiness, your happiness too. Even my happiness, if I had those all. Of course, I do. But, nonetheless, the point of that was basically that there is bad news to happiness research, and that led us into our third episode. And the bad news was, unfortunately, that even though the research has revealed a lot of things about personal happiness that would make you a happier, more content person, many of those things, unfortunately, well, you may never get. So that kind of left us with a sort of a sour note, but then we found that there was good news to the happiness research picture. And that good news, of course, was what? Yes, you're saying it right now, I'm sure. The fabulous 14 Fundamentals program. The 14 Fundamentals program to increase happiness. Now, you recall the basis of that program. That program was developed through research of happy individuals and then experimented upon with our subjects in the very basement of the 7-story underground research complex where you visited with us. The premise behind that program to increase happiness was very simple, as you recall. And that is, if you can be more like happy people, you'll be happier yourself. In other words, we had isolated 14 characteristics about happy individuals, the 14 fundamentals that we have studied through this series of programs. And that these 14 traits, or these 14 characteristics, were things about happy individuals that we felt ordinary people could develop.
What are the 14 fundamentals? Well, you should have them memorized forwards and backwards by now. Be more active and keep busy, the kickoff fundamental. Spend more time socializing. Be productive at meaningful work. Get BO. Get better organized and plan things out. Stop worrying. Right in its tracks. Lower your expectations and aspirations. Develop a positive, optimistic thinking, the royal road. Get PO, or present-oriented. Work on a healthy personality. We call it WOOP. Develop an outgoing social personality. Be yourself. Eliminate negative feelings and problems. Close relationships are number one, and of course, ball hop, the secret fundamental.
Well, obviously, many years of research here have revealed that most everyone, there are always a few people that will be exceptions, but most everyone have been able to develop these 14 traits, or a number of the traits, and the more they do, the happier they seem to become. A very simple proposition that the more you can be like happy people, and what we've done simply is learn from them, the more you can learn about the nature of happiness from them, the more you can be like them, the happier person you will be. Well, that was the good news, and then we moved to, of course, a test of your personal happiness where you began to find out a little bit more about how well or how poorly you practiced many of those 14 fundamental characteristics. People obviously vary, as we've talked about. I guess it's no real secret. In the amount of fulfillment, satisfaction, and happiness they derive from their lives. The Achieved Personal Happiness Scale, HATCH as we, shortcut it, provides a measure of this kind of life satisfaction. Individuals scoring high on this test have achieved very high levels of personal happiness. Positive test items select individuals who are very satisfied with the way their life is going, derive great happiness from living, gain many rewarding feelings from the major aspects of their life, school, home, job, family life, whatever, show vitality and good health, and have a disposition that is generally quite content and happy, an everyday mood that is pretty vivacious. Low scorers, on the other hand, have dispositions that are rarely happy and live lives that aren't going very well. They are not at all content with their lives and experience many stressors in their important life areas, school, home, job, so on and so forth, have many felt personal dissatisfactions, and consequently feel relatively unhappy and unsuccessful. After that, we began our journey down the fundamental lane, if you recall, with our program called The Lifestyle, the Happiness Lifestyle, where we examine such fundamentals as be more active, spend more time socializing, and especially being productive in meaningful work. Obviously, at the maximum, it would be great if you could model your entire lifestyle in accordance with these principles, and eventually that could be your goal. Well, on the very minimum level, it's suggesting by maybe just looking over your list and reconsidering some of these principles, you might be able to add just a little bit more pleasure to your life, and that indeed should be the beginning steps of adding a little bit more happiness to your life. What this fundamental suggests is at the very worst, keep busy, the very lowest level. It's one of the best antidotes for personal depression. Keeping active, keeping up with the routine, not to give into that tendency to let everything go, to give up, and so on and so forth. But at the very best, it indicates live that full life. Live that active life, and devote yourself more, perhaps, to activities like this than the activities that surround your day-to-day routine. Then we began to move to the attitude and value fundamentals with our program, The Arch Enemy of Personal Happiness, where we dealt with common everyday worry, and I certainly hope you've been thought-checking out there. Yes, we learned that 90% of your worries don't come true, and most all of them are uncontrollable anyway. And most of you will discover you worry a little bit more than you ever suspected, and why? Why? It's a very good question. I'm glad I asked myself that. Primarily because we don't bother to check up. We're so busy with today's worries that we forgot what we were worrying about yesterday. We don't have time to reconsider it. And tomorrow we'll be so consumed with that day's worries, and therefore it becomes a kind of a self-perpetuating thing. Now, where do we get this from? Well, your guess is as good as mine. No, I take that back. My guess is probably much better than yours. And I'll give you my guess. We learned this as a little kid. Worry seems to be a natural human kind of a tendency, And we pick it up when we see our parents, as the old man just worried about the bills, tearing those papers up, wringing his hair, oh, woe is me. And there's mom worried about dad paying the bills and saying, oh, woe is both of us. And you as little kids see that, so what do? Well, you go back in there and, in your own room and start scribbling around with some crayons and start worrying about those and tearing up those papers too. You really don't know what you're doing, but you're learning that worry habit. And once that worry habit starts going, you never tend to examine it again. Well, that's exactly what worry analysis, however, requires. Because the idea is, after you've kept your worry journal for a while, say at least a couple days, but in many studies, people have kept up with the worry journal for as much as 2 or 3 weeks. In some cases, some of the studies that I originally read in this area at some rather prestigious Midwestern universities had individuals keep a worry journal for much as a month. The idea, though, is after you've kept it for a while, and I think 2 or 3 days is good just for demonstration purposes, put your journal away and let it kind of sit and stew for about a week without really examining it. Now, the next question you need to ask yourself, once you break your worry journal out again, and once you begin to examine what you had written, the question is, was it worth all this trouble? Were you fretting? Were you worried about something that was worthwhile? Or was it kind of an exercise where you spent a great deal of time worried about things that never happened at all? Well, the way you discover that is to go back over your list and figure out the percentage of your worries that in fact came true. You worried about the car broken down? Did it? You worried about the kids at home? Were they okay? You were worried about flunking the exam? Did you? You were worried about nuclear war? Did it break out? Well, not yet. And I think what you will discover is a rather overwhelming insight that can help you nip your worries right in the bud. And that is the amazing finding that we have discovered in our work here and other studies, where almost 90% of the average person's worries, in fact, never come true. Our next lesson after that, of course, was the last thing you'd ever expect, where we dealt with the controversial fundamental called lower your expectations and aspirations. The interesting idea that happy people aren't really waiting for long-term goals, lofty aspirations to change them around. They're happy now, and they apparently know, as you have learned, that happiness is a way to travel, not a place to arrive. And the idea of lowered, more modest goals is, one, you'll end up being more successful because you'll want what you can reasonably get, and 2, you won't be setting yourself up for disappointments. But primarily, you've learned to focus more on the present, because that's where happiness lies, not necessarily in the future. This is part of the lesson, therefore, that happy individuals are trying to teach us. and why we have coined the phrase a long time ago, that perhaps happiness is much more of a way to travel than a place to arrive. Now, certainly happy individuals have their ambitions, they have their goals set for themselves, but it's a totally different approach. Happy individuals, if these good things happen, it's going to be just more additional gravy on an already full turkey, so to speak. And yet for the unhappy individual, these goals are seen as something that's going to change everything around. Now, apparently therein lies the fallacy of that approach. Because one of the sad things that unhappy individuals do is, in addition to placing their happiness contingent upon long-term goals and aspirations coming true, they are also learning along the way such unhappiness habits of self-denial, of putting aside their family, of forsaking love relationships, of not taking time just to enjoy themselves, things like that. They sacrifice everything in an attempt to get to this place, and if they do, because that's a big if, but if they do, they find they have habituated themselves so much to these unhappiness strategies that they can't enjoy what they finally achieve. So, in that sense, my friends, once again, it appears that happiness is much more of a way to travel than a place to arrive. And therein is a kind of a funny lesson, maybe a little bit of a harsh lesson. What that would indicate is that if one can't learn the secret to happiness in the present, nothing in the future may make that much difference. And it's something for you to examine too. If you can't learn to be happy within the constraints of your own particular situations these days, what makes you think any great achievement in the future is going to make that much difference? It's a good question as to whether that really is going to be, make that much difference or not. Now, our next program was the Royal Road, wasn't it? The tremendously highly potent fundamental regarding developing your optimistic positive thinking. Now, obviously, an optimistic positive attitude took us back to that time clock theory that we had discussed in the previous program. The idea that happiness is largely contingent on what runs through your mind. And if your mind is bogged down with pessimistic, negative, worried, fretful, regretful thoughts, remorse, blaming, guilt, bitterness, you will never be a truly happy person. And so we began to realize that positive thinking, a positive interpretation of events, and that basic overriding optimistic spirit that you're going to be happy no matter what, that whatever happens, happens for the best, that looking on the bright side of most every situation is the royal road to personal happiness, and also, as we referred to it then, the missing link. In happiness research, the one thing that explained to us some of the ironies in our data, such ironies as individuals who seemingly have nothing being very happy, and of course, individuals with everything, those millionaires who cry themselves to sleep every night. Well, we found out optimism was the thing that explained those rare exceptions to the big board in the sky. That's a kind of a strange thing we're talking about. What we're suggesting is so much of your personal happiness is really has to do more with your mind, as we said, how you interpret what you have rather than what you really have. And yet more and more psychologically, the evidence we're accumulating seems to indicate that this kind of illusory sort of thing is indeed the nature of personal happiness. It is much more how you view what you have rather than what you actually have that makes the difference in your personal happiness. Now, what does this mean? This means that essentially, if one could develop their optimism to a high enough degree, one could be in a situation where they could literally almost transcend the actual events of life and short-circuit this entire formula to go directly to happiness itself. It is the suggestion that almost any event can be viewed in such a positive way that almost every event can be viewed happily. And therefore, when that begins to occur, one has that ability perhaps to sort of, like I say, transcend the actual events of life and head directly to happiness as it occurs. Now, after all is said and done, what optimism really is a kind of a spirit. Indeed, it is interpreting events, it is indeed looking on the bright side, it is indeed looking for the positive, it's indeed kind of a matter of selective perception. But more than anything else, I would like to define optimism as a general belief kind of a belief system, and it's a simple belief. It is a belief that you are going to be happy no matter what. You're going to be happy no matter what happens to you, or let's rephrase that. You're going to feel happy no matter what happens to you. Now, in a sense, this is optimism in its finest sense. And this apparently is what happy individuals have going for them. Once again, they seem to short-circuit the whole system because they realize as good or bad as the actual circumstances or events that happen to them are, or the situations they find themselves in them, a positive, optimistic view of life gives them the ability to kind of just transcend and short-circuit the whole formula. It is a belief in one's own mental powers, in a sense. As we said, happiness is in the mind, and those who learn to master it and control it are in the driver's seat. It is belief, like I say, an expectation that things will work out for the best, and that you will be happy no matter what. Now, our final episode, or not our final episode, the next episode we went into was Get P.O., Get B.O. Get P.O., present orientation, once again focused our attention on the fact that happy individuals focus in on now. They are intent in living the full life in the present. They're not unduly preoccupied with past hurts or future plans. Basically, now is the time for happiness for happy individuals, and because their focus is on the present, they're better decision makers, as well as more efficient, as well as being able to perhaps soak a little bit more enjoyment out of everyday common events, rather than waiting for the spectacular things to happen in the future or in the past. These days are the good old days, apparently, for happy individuals, and most of their attention, most of their efforts, most of their mind, their conscious or their focus, or what we might refer to as their contact with reality, tends to be pretty much within these days, the immediate time frame. Now, certainly they have fond and bad memories from the past, and certainly they have their hopes and aspirations for the future, but the concentration, the mental concentration, is pretty much on the moment. In fact, Maslow noted these self-actualized individuals, healthy individuals, tend to not only focus on the moment, but they're able to appreciate it in such a beautiful, almost artistic sense. They seem to be the type of individuals who never lose that kind of lust for life, the sense of beauty and awe, and almost childlike quality that they possess, that seem to, they seem to still see the magic in everyday little events of this kind of a thing. Get B.O., of course, getting better organized, obviously happy individuals. You, for example, I'm sure have tried to get a little bit better organized just simply by practicing these fundamentals. It's pretty obvious that if you are going to continue to work with the 14 Fundamentals program, you're going to have to be a little bit more efficient, a little bit better directed. You're going to have your overall goals in sight and work steadily and non-procrastinatingly toward those goals on a daily basis. As you recall, periods of non-productivity, periods of procrastination tend to be one of the more insidious and least noticeable causes of personal depression.
One of the things the research has shown quite clearly over the years, and bear in mind these fundamentals are not necessarily my ideas, but based on the research, is the incredible amount of organization and planfulness happy individuals have in their lives. Of course, we've talked about their spontaneity in a social sense, but when it comes to their both long-term and short-term goals, happy individuals seem to be very well organized. They have a great game plan going for them. Now, the research is quite specific in many of these areas. Happy individuals, for example, seem to have a much better idea of their attitudes and values. Their philosophy of life is much better organized. They seem to have a great deal more certainty regarding their values, their attitudes, their beliefs, and they seem to have a much better sense of direction, as we've talked about before. Happy individuals apparently get much of what they want in life, partially because they seem to know where they're going.
Well, the next program, of course, was Roll Up, where we introduced you to the work on a healthy personality 5. Like yourself, how important your self-concept is, accept yourself, going a little easier in your shortcomings and weaknesses, know yourself, accurate self-knowledge being one of the highly characteristic things of happy, healthy individuals, helping yourself, the idea of personal responsibility, of independence, of being able to stand comfortably on your own, and the satisfaction, the self-satisfaction that comes from handling most of your needs pretty much on your own. And then finally, be yourself. To talk a little bit about liking yourself and how it relates to personal happiness, because This kind of takes us back to the old time clock theory that we discussed when we were, dealing with what? What was the time clock theory? Thought check, that whole idea. I think we brought it up when we talked about stopping worrying. And that was the idea that your happiness is directly contingent on the amount of time, basically, that you spend feeling or thinking positive kinds of thoughts versus the amount of time you spend thinking negative thoughts. And that obviously the more clock time you spend during the average day or week or month, in pleasant thoughts to negative thoughts and that kind of a ratio, the happier a person you would tend to be, and the more you could tend to increase the amount of positive to negative thoughts, the happier you would eventually become. Your emotional, your morale would be directly reflecting of that. Now, when we talk about time clock theory, obviously self-concept comes into play very heavily. And this is one of the benefits happy individuals have going for them that they carry with them everywhere, and one of the detrimental qualities unhappy individuals have that they carry with them everywhere. Whether you like it or not, it may be too obvious, maybe it's a little bit ridiculous, but you're obviously stuck with yourself. And there's no doubt that wherever you go, whatever you do, your self-perceptions are something you always carry with you. Everyone to some degree or another is self-conscious. We're not talking about the awkward, uncomfortable, inadequate feelings of self-consciousness. Perhaps self-awareness would be a better term. We're all constantly self-aware. We're always continuously, somewhat, and subliminally aware of ourselves. It's always us who's doing things, even when we're asleep, even when we're dreaming. We can't really escape us. It's still us doing the acting. We're the ones that are falling from tall buildings or whatever we're dreaming about. Therefore, you begin to see how important self-concept is in terms of one's overall happiness. Apparently, individuals who really like themselves, who feel good about themselves, carry with them one huge chunk of never-changing, positive feelings to always rely upon. Here is one huge chunk of positive feelings that happy individuals carry with them everywhere, something they can always count on no matter what other thoughts might happen to enter their mind. Well, of course, Be Yourself was part of the second part of our WOWOP episode. And then we dealt with the fabulous A's and the B's, the idea that not everyone's going to like you, nor should they, and basically the best way to find people who are going to like you just the way you are, which is what I think all of us want, is simply just to be the way you are in the first place. And the point is pretty clear. By just simply being yourself, being what you naturally are, everything seems to work out so harmoniously, so comfortably, and usually in your best interest. If you simply just portray yourself the way you are, be honest from the very start, as we talked about before, and essentially, just be yourself. And let the chips fall where they may. Because when you are, apparently you will tend to avoid a great deal of interaction with those people that simply recognize from the start that they're incompatible with you. And you tend to be attractive to the people who will be right for you. The second part of that final WOWOP episode, of course, dealt with the depressing fundamental, eliminate negative feelings and problems. And of course we talked about some of the emotional stumbling blocks, the symptomology of emotional deterioration, that basically are the early warning symptoms of an unhealthy personality. And we talked about some of the things one can do. Now, it's a good time here to kind of reemphasize the point we made at that time. That is basically the 14 Fundamental Program is in no way meant to be a replacement for mental health counseling, for therapy, for that kind of professional help when it is needed. Our hope is, of course, that for even relatively troubled people, the 14 fundamentals can certainly be a helpful adjunct, but by no means is it meant to be a cure-all. And if you have found in your examination of this 14 fundamental program that happiness still does not seem to be coming your way, or if, unfortunately, on the other hand, you're one of the very rare people who found your education in personal happiness perhaps maybe making you more keenly aware of your unhappy nature, then perhaps one should really seriously consider what we talked about in those previous episodes, and that is possibly seeking out some professional help, counseling, or some community resources to possibly take you through those stumbling blocks so that you, too, in a little bit healthier frame of mind, may be able to continue climbing up the happiness ladder with the 14 fundamentals at a later date. Now the final program, or the next to the final program, I guess, the one we dealt with probably just last time, was, of course, close love relationships are number one. The number one source of personal happiness. We sort of put the best till last, but as you recall, as important and potent as close love relationships are, we sort of postponed our discussion of them to the very end, because as you recall at the beginning of our episode, we kind of learned that as much as close love relationships have a tremendous effect on your happiness, they're also somewhat the least controllable. Yes, one can never really fully control or anticipate the changes and vicissitudes in love. And even though love brings great happiness rewards, it tends to be one of the more illusory and ephemeral kinds of things in life that comes and goes, sometimes through no one's fault of their own. Imagine yourself in such a good relationship, where all of these things fell naturally in place. And they fell in place because you climbed the mountain of love properly. You looked at each step to the development of each of these qualities. And each has been continually nurtured. What kind of a place would you be in? How would you feel if you had all these fine things? Well, of course, most people blurt out with happy, and of course you'd be happy. Obviously, that's why love and a good love relationship is the number one source of personal happiness. Its impact is tremendous. But I think you'd also feel something else. Yeah. I think you'd feel a tremendous amount of freedom. Love, in its finest sense, can be a freeing kind of condition. In a place where you are completely trusted and worthy of it. In a place where you are respected and accepted. A place where you're completely known and understood for what you really are, no pretenses. It's a very freeing condition. So freeing that it tends to do something very few relationships do. That's why we have it. All the way to the very tippy top of the mountain of love. Yes, indeed, the final level, ding, 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 is growth. Only in the best relationships do people find themselves in a situation where they are able to continue to grow and develop as a human being. And then, of course, finally this evening, we're wrapping up the entire series in the psychology of happiness with the final fundamental we just discussed, value happiness. It appears that the people who are the happiest seem to be the ones who simply want it the most. The people who are the most successful in the pursuit of happiness are the ones that apparently think about it and analyze it the most. That's a kind of an interesting sort of a thing when you think about it. Because what that suggests is that perhaps happy individuals are happy partially simply because they want to be happy so much more than the rest of us. And that just seems to set natural priorities that help them greater attain it. Now, on one hand, that may sound a little strange. A lot of people would suggest, that can't be. And I think that's based on the old idea that happiness is just so illusory, ephemeral, that there's nothing really tangible to know about it. But I hope the one thing you all have gained through this experience is an understanding that in recent years we have come to understand happiness in scientific terms. And we find that knowledge about happiness can be just as substantial and can be developed just as scientifically and is just as reliable as knowledge in any scientific area. Now, it is my personal wish that all of you have discovered something important about the nature of your own happiness, if only from an educational point of view. I'm sure you found the information quite fascinating, interesting, hopefully thought-provoking, something to give you some new insights on this life's most ancient mystery of happiness, the most important thing in life. But beyond that is my firm hope, my personal wish for each and every one of you, that through this episode, through this series of programs, you have discovered something that can greatly increase your own personal happiness, and that your appreciation, your understanding, and perhaps your sensing and even enjoyment of happiness has increased through our various lessons. Well, there's not too much to say after all that, except perhaps Valhalla, my friends, my personal wishes for your happiness. So let's practice that. So let's practice that right now. You want to do that with me? Valhop. Valhop. You're going to have to work with the fingers for a while. Yes, Valhop. Excellent, my friend. The secret fundamental. Well, that is basically the end of our happiness series, and I certainly appreciate your attendance here and your cooperation with me. So, we will, I don't know when we'll see you. I guess all we can say is, Valhop. Yeah, Valhop. You don't have to continue to follow me.